Nilesh, and I will be focusing primarily what your question is, that what are the challenges pharmaceutical industry and in general the drug development process people involved in are facing now. Any drug development requires clinical trial, and a clinical trial in the entire globe due to COVID-19 situation is now in a difficult situation. I would say there are three types of challenges in a clinical trial. One is a new trial beginning, and that is almost standstill. No clinical trial, new trials are being taking place because of the uncertain situation of the involvement or including the clinical trial volunteers or patients. And the major problem in the ongoing clinical trial is how to monitor them, how to get the data from them, how to ensure that the patient or the subject visit hospital in due time, or his clinical situation is closely monitored. And therefore, there is a large number of missing data. And if there is a missing data, and a large missing data, and then ultimately a conclusion is drawn on that missing data by the regulator, it is a challenge whether that decision, that conclusion is acceptable or then translational level is a challenge. And therefore, the important thing with the startups, the important issue with the pharmaceutical industry comes is the increasing use of artificial intelligence. Can we use artificial intelligence to predict more accurate outcome based on the data which is available, which is shrinken, which is missed data? So that is important thing. The another challenge which can be solved by artificial intelligence, and the entire pharma industry and the scientists are looking towards, is can we have a decentralized clinical trial or remote trial? That means instead of patient coming to the hospital for clinical trial enrollment, take the clinical trial to the patient's home. And here the site, clinical trial site, becomes the patient's home, and the patient's the day-to-day patient's clinical caregiver becomes the clinical trial investigator. The main important issue in this is the industry and the academic institution have to make the clinical trial protocol so simple that it can be done by the home caregiver. All trials cannot be done, but some trials can be done, and international FDA regulations and including Indian regulations are now looking the possibility how this can be done. That is one important thing.
So Mr. Gupta, I'm actually jumping out of my seat right now. Yeah. To your point, I think what you said, how can technology really help the trial process? I've been a part of certain discussions as a part of my startup, and we've actually looked at that, and it's a great point. Also, a request to all my panelists, if you can turn on your videos so our audience can see you. I think, Mr. Gupta, also there are a lot of challenges, and I would also have Mr. Jain and Mr. Dua address this. When we talk about clinical trials, there are a lot of regulatory and ethical challenges. And also, how does government actually help? Because, I've been very closely associated with manufacturing of trauma implants. And the applicability of these trials and regulations is so standardized from a GOI perspective that how do we actually help new startups bringing innovation in this sector? So with that, I'll open the stage for Mr. Jain and Mr. Dua also, along with Mr. Gupta. Go ahead.
I think you raised a very fundamental issue, and that is the concern every startup, every settled industry is trying to make. And the government of India, the regulators have responded very positively. The Department of Biotechnology has constituted, on the direction of the Government of India, a board which is chaired by RCGM chairman and also by DCGI. And the mandate is that if there is anything related to COVID, it should be immediately addressed too. If anything which is a repurposing drug, the Drug Controller General has to hear it overnight, and that's what they are doing it. They're sitting in the office and responding to such application, and within 2 days the applications are reviewed and approved. The issue of devices is much simplified now, and the regulators are expected to respond, which they are doing very fast. there is a possibility and there is a provision of a waiver of several clinical trial, the toxicological data, the clinical trial phase, and the many mutagenicity and other studies in case we know how the drug is, the background of the drug. So these are the regulatory fast track approval method which is now available in this unusual scenario.
Right.